What role then for the Fed tomorrow night in the United States? Some are saying there's got to be a 50 basis point cut. Putting to one side liquidity, as you've just mentioned, within financials, the broader economy needs a kickstart.
That is right. And I think what we've seen over the past 3 or 4 months is that inflation is less of a concern than it was or than it has been. The oil price has fallen from $150 odd down to, I think, lower than $100 now. So, will the Fed continue to print money to solve the problem? We think it'll solve the problem in part, but ultimately there just needs to be a clearing of asset values. We've been through a period of 3, 4, 5 years where there was enormous leverage in the system. Asset values got very inflated, and only once they come down to more sensible and realistic levels can that form a basis for sustainable growth going forward.
Just compare, contrast then Lehman's and Bear Stearns. What made Lehman's a different beast such that it was allowed to fail?
Look, I think the circumstances were different back in May to where they are now.
Why?
Well, the full extent of the problems hadn't yet developed and I guess become apparent to the Fed.
So it was knee-jerk by the Fed and the
Well, there were some pretty material issues with Bear Stearns. I mean, the key issue that needed to be addressed was that Bear was counterparty to so many different other investors, investment banks, institutions, that if they would have been allowed to fail for weeks, if not months, people wouldn't have known where they were in relation to one-on-one counterparty transactions with Bear Stearns. And these are the very issues which Lehman is working through right now. But the situation we have is that 10 days ago, Fannie and Freddie were effectively bailed out. Over this past weekend, Lehman and Merrill. There's a very serious moral hazard issue here, Carson. The Fed simply can't continue to bail out every failing financial institution. Because
unless it's too big to fail, and that's why they're saying AIG, by all accounts, is too big to fail. So it could be rescued.
We think it could be supported, and the situation evolves. It continues to be fluid. We're not going to make a forecast or a prediction, but we generally do agree with your point that only the institutions which are too big to fail and would cause material systematic risk to the system would ultimately be rescued.
What about these rescue mechanisms that the Fed has now put in place, the collateral requirements, the quality of those has effectively just gone to junk status. That's a significant sea change. How significant is that, and how wise is that?
There should be a screaming message in that. If you look at what happened to Fannie and Freddie last weekend, people were saying it's a good sign that they've been effectively rescued. I mean, to us, the message was clear. It's like, well, if this is what they have to do to shore up Fannie and Freddie, how bad is the situation really? And we think in terms of the collateral requirements, the argument is the same. If the Fed is prepared to lower the bar in terms of the quality of the collateral that they're prepared to have pledged, it's got to be telling you something, that there's some pretty serious problems out there which can't be solved quickly.
But where does that at the end of the day leave Joe Public, mum and dad investor? If the quality of the collateral every time has to be poured over, it's not bringing certainty. It's not a rubber stamp to say you'll get your liquidity. It's going to be monitored at every step of the way. That's a very bogged down process.
I think the Fed is hoping that through this process they can shore up a bit more confidence. Equity prices will stabilize. At certain levels, banks will be able to raise capital, and they'll somehow be able to turn it around. And I think that, given where we are, the Fed needs to be doing something, and based on their assessment, and they've got some really smart people working there, that's what they've decided is the right thing to do. But is it ultimately going to solve the problem? We just think it's a problem which needs to be worked through, and they're just trying to manage through it in the best way they can.
Explain to me, bringing this all back to Australia now, why it is that our banks, putting to one side our diversified financials, continue to unravel amidst all of this, when people saying we're a relatively illiquid market compared with the United States. We shouldn't be subject to the same vicissitudes, as it were, as what's going on Wall Street.
Well, I don't think we are. I guess to answer the question, there haven't been any bank failures here in Australia compared to what's gone on in the US. I think across the country there have probably been between 10 and 20 bank failures already. We haven't seen them here in Australia. I think that the banking models here in Australia have been slightly more conservative over the past 4 or 5 years than has been the case in the US, and that should serve the banks well riding through this period we're currently in. One observation I would make, however, in relation to the Australian banks is that if one looks across the big four, the business model, the broad business model and the business lines which they operate are not dissimilar. So, broadly similar in terms of the types of businesses that they're engaged in. And the message in that for us, or what that suggests, is if there's a systemic problem, if a business line is impacted or an asset class is impacted, it's unlikely just to hit one of the banks. It could well impact them all together, which could mean they might all have to raise capital at the same time. And if all the banks had to come to the market at the same time, that could cause issues.
On that salutary note, we'll leave it there. Nick Rafferty, many thanks for your time. Do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Nick Rafferty, Ashton Advisors, there with us.